Here. I want to go back to the Batcave. We can play for a couple more minutes. So I'm actually interested in this conversation.
But the funny thing is, though, is when his War Department brought that up to him, Lincoln's famous line, he said, then I want whatever he's drinking, because this guy wins.
He was actually really funny.
He was, yeah. Well, and then as soon as Grant came in, he was named the Lieutenant General, which, by the way, Lincoln voted to make that rank. He voted to reinstate that rank specifically for Grant, because that rank was last used during the George Washington era. And then they stopped using the rank of Lieutenant General.
George Washington Carver?
Yes. And then Lincoln basically was like, well, here's another guy that's worthy of this rank. So I thought that was kind of neat.
That is cool.
So, but yeah, anyways, once Grant came in, the war, like, changed. Who's that person?
That's, Batman.
Okay.
It's Bruce, and then you can also play as Deathstroke. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember Deathstroke. But yeah, when he took over the Army of the Potomac, he was marching south towards Richmond, and it was during his Overland campaign, and which was basically seen as one of the bloodiest campaigns of the entire war, because Grant just kept pushing his troops further and further south, and the Confederacy just kept attacking them and just mowing them down, but Grant just kept pushing. Because he's like, they're just camping around Richmond. We can't win the war unless you just take Richmond. Like, he basically understood this ideology of, we're going to lose people, but we need to keep pushing. You can't keep retreating.
Right.
And during his Overland campaign, there was a point where you come across like a fork in the road, and this was actually the furthest south that anyone in the Army of the Potomac had ever gone to at this point in the war. Because every time they would go there, their generals would send their army back, because this fork in the road splits off, and one half goes to Washington and the other half goes down to Richmond. And their generals would just be like, well, we've pushed far enough, let's go back to Washington and regroup. But Grant came upon this fork in the road, and his military started walking to the left because they were, used to just going back to Washington, D.C., but Grant was on his horse, and he rode out front of them and went to the right towards Richmond. Mm-hmm. And the camp, there was like a little pause before they kind of realized like what he was doing. And then all of a sudden there's like a big cheer across the camp, because they're like, finally someone wants us to actually march towards Richmond.
That's funny.
And Grant was literally the only person willing to actually do that. And then basically took over in, I think it was March of 1864, and within a year the war ended. They've been fighting for like 3.5 to 4 years, and Grant took over and then just ended in a year.
Yeah, because he was a badass.
Yeah, he was the only one actually willing to take the fight to Richmond. Because all these other people were just incompetent. So, anyways.
Well, they were too busy hiring hookers.
Basically, yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really like U.S. Grant. I have a lot of admiration for him.
So you never told us.
What was the point? Sorry.
You never told us, like, what you thought about which one was more right and which one was more left.
Okay. So,
you never got a channel canceled.
I'm sorry.
Hey, before Nate says this, there is a real possibility that I have cancer. So, no, I'm just bringing it up at the point we record this, because I want history to remember that a dying man possibly asked his friend his opinion, and I want anyone who attacks us for it to be remembered in history as a dick.
Right.
So that's what I want out of this. I want anyone who questions my question to be remembered as an asshole who, like, attacked a man who could be on his last legs.
Right. Well, I think it's important to point out that a lot of the parties nowadays, like Republican and Democrat, I personally do not think they are similar at all to the Republican and Democrat Party of the 1870s.
Would you like to make them great again?
I would love to make the Democrat Party great again.
Oh, okay.
Of the 1870s.
Uh-oh.
It goes along with your white hood, Red Dead plate.
Oh, got it. Okay. Hey, also, by the way, before you tell me about this, I want to point out I was playing. That's why we did so well.
Well, I was actually the one playing.
No, it was
but thanks
me.
for hijacking.
It was me.
Thanks for stolen valor.
Look, I like almost doubled that high score.
So I think that's important to realize because people get really triggered nowadays. Like, you know, like they just get really offended about this stuff. But
Yeah, I'm always offended.
I am too. But I think the idea of the party switch, I've never believed this, right? Because the idea of the party switch is basically that one party is now the other party. And to me, I kind of believe more in like a party shift, you know? Where it's like, obviously people in 2022 are not caring at all or voting for the same things that the people in the 1870s were voting for, you know? So like, yeah, the parties are going to look different because it's a different era, you know? But yet people will swear by the party switch. And to me, the party switch crowd is the people that basically just don't want to acknowledge the sins of their past. Which, by the way, shouldn't even matter because it's like 100 years ago. But second of all, that's just kind of what it seems like.
Oh, so
to
you're
me.
saying I'm going to put words in your mouth and ask you a question. Are you basically saying that the the left wants to pretend that there was a party switch so they don't have to claim the Klan?
Yes,
Is
that is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
And the reason why is because every time I look online to see someone like what's the party switch, you know, everyone's response is always one of two things. It's always, oh well, I learned about the party switch in my high school class, as if like the high school class can't be wrong, first of all, or have an agenda.
A teacher has
by
never
the way.
been wrong. What are you talking about?
Second of all, the dates always change for this stuff. I remember when the party switch thing first came about. This was like 10 years ago when you first started hearing about the party switch. I remember it was all like, oh, well, they changed under the Wilson era, like Woodrow Wilson era of his progressivism. Which, by the way, I've actually been reading a biography on these presidents, and I read a biography on Teddy Roosevelt. I'm actually currently reading one on Woodrow Wilson right now. Every progressive thing, like I'm talking like minimum wage, I'm talking like max hours you can work, I'm talking all these things that people swear by Woodrow Wilson on, he stole them from Teddy Roosevelt. Like 10 years before this, Teddy Roosevelt's speeches was literally campaigning for all these things. Workers' comp was another one, a big one. And then all of a sudden, like 10 years later, Woodrow Wilson was like, oh, look at me, I'm a super progressive. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, you just stole these from Teddy Roosevelt. Like, these aren't even your ideas. You just claim them and then now, like, want to hijack the Progressive Party.
Right.
So anyways, and then it was like, oh, Woodrow Wilson, yeah, they changed around that point. But then once everyone started realizing that Woodrow Wilson was actually a raging racist and the son of a Confederate, like a literal Confederate, all of a sudden then it switched to, oh, actually under Franklin Roosevelt, they changed. That's when the party switch happened under his New Deal. And then all of a sudden I saw people online now saying like, oh, well, actually it was under Lyndon Johnson, under the civil rights movement that they changed. And I'm kind of like, when did this party switch? Like, first of all, you can't even get your dates right.
I did bad there.
Yeah. And I feel like the reason why people got off Franklin Roosevelt is because then they found out about the Japanese internment camps. So then they didn't want to claim Franklin Roosevelt as a true modern-day liberal.
Wait a minute. But if you don't claim them, then isn't workers' comp and all these other things, weren't they conservative ideas then?
Yes.
You say that.
Yes. And actually, here's the other thing.
That doesn't make any sense.
Well, and this is why I'm like, what are we talking about here? Because like Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican his whole life.
Right.
After he left office in 1909 and William Taft took over, Teddy Roosevelt went on a trip to the Africa.
Okay.
He was going on a trip in like the night. Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
And basically he was hearing about Taft not advancing any of his policies.
Uh-huh.
So then he got like so angry that he basically came back. It's a long story short. He came back and decided to run again in the 1912 election. Jeez, you see that guy go flying?
Yeah, I did.
And eventually it was because him and Taft split the Republican vote that Woodrow Wilson won the election.
Okay. So they were idiots.
Right. And because Theodore Roosevelt ran under a third party called the Progressive Party.
Yeah.
Because Theodore Roosevelt was not a far right, normal conservative, he had more progressive ideas. Why are these people like going flying?
I don't know. I don't really understand this. What's going on here? I'm just kind of like playing so that we're not sitting on a main menu, basically.
So it's basically like this thing of Theodore Roosevelt is a Republican, but he was more of like a moderate Republican. Mm-hmm. He had ideas that would be considered progressive also.
Like the Klan.
Right. Yeah, he loved the Klan. Oh, I mean, no.
Sorry.
But, I don't know, I guess my point is, like, to me, it's like, all these progressive ideas were all made by Republican people. Well, yeah, he ran under the Progressive Party, but he would have been a Republican if Taft was not the Republican candidate.
Well, also, especially if you go by the ideology of the party switch.
Yes.
Because once you do that, then you're literally just handing... Yeah, okay, I couldn't tell that guy was armored. Never mind. Yes, you are obviously getting rid of the bad things, but then aren't you also handing the positives to the other side?
Yes, and that's kind of what my rebuttal is. For anyone who says party switch, I'm always like, what year? What year are we talking about here? If you want to go in the Lyndon Johnson era that is switched, I can go all the Democrats after that and tell you the bullcrap things they did. You know what I mean?
Right, you can't ever get away from the bad stuff that those parties did. Oh my gosh, like I humped the air.
And that's what these party switch people, that's what pisses me off so much. Is because it's like, just stop getting away from the bad stuff that your party did and actually start moving on. Like, the Klan, I would argue that the Klan is not part of the Democrat Party nowadays.
Right.
So, why do we need to, like...
I'd even argue that the Klan isn't part of the Republican Party either. I'd just say that they are extremists who are much more likely to vote right.
Right. And it's like, that doesn't mean the right supports the Klan.
Or even wants them.
Right. It just means that that's who, like, the right cannot choose who votes for them. Like, they're not, like, going into the polls and being like, you're not allowed to vote for me. Like, they don't get to pick who votes for them. If the Klan happens to vote for them, they just vote for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I guess that's my thing with the party switch. But, what was your original point? I'm sorry, I got long-winded.
It was no. That's okay. I'm doing horrible on these. Okay. I feel like in this game, by the way, I feel like there is less leeway to do bad.
Yes.
So, like, I messed up one round. I messed up round 3.
And then now you don't get 3.
And because of that, I don't get 3 stars.
Yeah.
We're not doing all these, by the way, just so you know.
Right.
I'm only doing them as, like, background.
Right.
My question had just been if you thought that the Confederates were more right or left-leaning.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And I think we got to you thought they were more left-leaning.
Yes, I would say... At the time, the Confederates were the Democrats. And I guess for me, I don't believe in a party switch. So I guess I would say if you wanted to make a claim, I would say the Confederates would still be Democrats. Because I don't think there was a big party switch, It's just, I don't think there was.
Right.
Now there was party shifts, like under William Taft. He kind of refused to, he wasn't a racist, but basically to try to get some votes in the South too, he basically didn't hire any black federal workers like in his cabinet at all, which was totally different than what the Republican Party stood for. He just didn't. Again, he wasn't racist, but he just was like, well, this will kind of piss off people in the South if I hire a bunch of, like, black people here.
So he basically caved.
Yeah, he to look good. Right. Which I would argue makes him kind of a weak Republican.
And also...
And that actually pissed off Theodore Roosevelt, by the way.
Right, and also kind of cowardly.
Yes.
Like, because you're not willing to stand up for
what your party even believes in, right.
And this is the other thing for me. This is just my take, but... For me, something I've noticed that there's going to be a lot of people who disagree with this. I don't care about, like, the sins of some guy 200 years ago.
Right.
I don't care at all. Now, do I think it's sad? Mm-hmm. Yes. Like, when you tell me like, hey, this like complete asshole cheated this Native American tribe out of their land and like killed them.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that. I don't like knowing that because it's sad that happened.
Right.
But I wasn't there.
Right.
I'm not even a direct descendant of that guy. Like, if you want to go by the sins of the father thing, you know, like, it would be like me holding anybody from the country that Osama bin Laden is from, since he was killed, responsible for what he did.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. You have nothing to do with him just because you're closer in a coloring book crayon, you know, color scale to his skin.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with what he did. It's just he was a jackass, right?
Right.
So I feel the same way about all these like racist dicks that were white or black or whatever. And I would say throughout American history, a lot of them were white.
Mm-hmm.
I feel the same way about that. Like that stuff, those people should be called out for the bad things that they did, and also the good things that they did should be acknowledged.
Right.
Like, you want to point out that there were founding fathers with slaves and talk about how that was sad that was acceptable at the time. I am all for pointing that out. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that means that you get rid of all the good that they did with it. I think it just means that you point it out as like a history lesson of, look at all the good this guy did. By the way, he was a racist. Isn't that crazy that this racist guy still managed to make one of the best countries in the entire world? Like, how does that happen?
Right.
And point out those character flaws so that people can learn from them. Because it should be a lesson that even people with horrible character flaws can do good.
Yeah.
And that humanity can progress past them. Mm-hmm. Like, now we can do the good of, I don't know, George Washington. But we could ignore any character flaws he had. By the way, I really like George Washington.
I do too.
But I mean, like, he's probably one of the morally most sound founding fathers too. But like, you know, any of these guys, or like, you know, even looking in history at like JFK, for example. JFK is a president I actually really respect for a couple reasons, and the main one being that he was not a coward.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that his father basically had so many ties to organized crime that JFK and Bobby were both essentially put into government as stand-ins for the mob.
Right.
They were seen as like an easy look the other way fall guy who wouldn't push them. But JFK was so pissed about that at a certain point. Like, when he was young, it was like, yeah, whatever, you know, dad's well off and like, so am I, and I'm gonna have a good life. But as he got older, he also wanted to make a name for himself, and he didn't want his family to just be remembered as those asshole Kennedys that, like, you know, slept around, were corrupt, and were willing to look the other way while Americans suffered.
Right.
So he started pushing back, and I'd argue that's why he got killed. You know, things like that. I respect the hell out of the guy, but you know what? His dad was a piece of shit. And guess what else? He was kind of too. He cheated on his wife.
Multiple times.
He did all kinds of bad stuff. And look, now I get it, like wanting to bang Marilyn Monroe and everything. I completely understand. But I'm just saying, like, this dude had his character flaws that were bad things.
Right.
That he did that were not okay. You know, like, he also kind of dishonored the White House in some ways by sneaking girls in and out through passages and other stuff in the White House for, like, hookup rendezvous.
Right.
That kind of stuff is really unprofessional when you're supposed to be representing an entire country.
Yeah.
But look at all the good he did, you know? And I think it's really sad that he's remembered for being the president who got killed. Because I think that there's way more to that guy than that. Like, he was also the president who was willing to stand up against what his family stood for and try and do something good for America. And he was also against secret societies. He called out secret societies, and he called out these bourgeoisie, like, high-up people. Like, dude, JFK should be, like, a freaking hero for any American that even slightly leans towards, like, socialist even. And the reason I say that is because, yes, he wasn't for that stuff, but he was very much against the rich controlling everything.
Right.
But no one looks at him that way. Like,
Everyone just remembers assassinated.
JFK should be a guy respected, in my opinion, by almost everybody. Right, left, whatever. But he's not, because he's seen as that guy who got shot, or he's seen as that guy who put his dick in all these girls.
Yeah.
And those are the ways that JFK is remembered. And I think that kind of stuff is really sad to me, because you can acknowledge the bad things. Like, I'm not saying it's his fault he got shot, but you can acknowledge him getting shot, right? You can acknowledge his character flaws and still acknowledge all the good things he did too, and not just remember him as that hot president who got a lot of puss.
Right.
Like, I think that my issue with modern understandings of history, and this is from someone who's not a history major but has a big interest in it as like a fascination. My biggest issue with it is the attempt to break down human beings into 2D characters.
Right.
Into like Abraham Lincoln represented good white people, or like Abraham Lincoln represented moving away from racism. It's like, no, Abraham Lincoln was a three-dimensional human being with a lot of character qualities.
Right, good and bad.
Like, and it's the same with all of these guys, you know, and you can look back at things and there's also no understanding anymore. It's just this guy was bad because he's bad. You know what's more interesting? What's more interesting to me is, how did David Duke end up believing what he believes? Why does he actually think that? Because I think that you're never going to beat bad character qualities in humanity if you don't try and understand them. And I feel like there's not an attempt anymore. It's just like, well, I don't know, like the Klan's bad. And it's like, yeah, I think we can all agree the Klan is bad, but like, can you figure out why they got to what they believed? And like, why they continued to stand firm in that? Why do people still join that ideology today? If you learn these things, that is how you dismantle those attitudes. Right. You don't learn them by saying, like, everyone in January 6th is a terrorist. You learn them by saying, why did this happen? You know? And I'm saying that's like a very minor example in modern history, but everybody brings it up. I saw people bringing it up this year trying to be like, oh, it's like 9/11. But like, instead of actually like examining the root cause of like, why did this happen? Is there support for why these people think the way they do? Not to make them right, but like, what evidences did they use to get to this ideology?
Yeah.
Even if it's wrong. You need to be able to figure that stuff out. Like, I'm being serious. Why do people in cults fall into cults? We started learning about that stuff decades ago. And the reason we started learning about it was to prevent more people from joining them. It's, you know, to understand the enemy, with the enemy being the negative traits of humanity, wherever and whatever they are. And if you're not willing to do that, you're not willing to examine those things, you're never going to move past them as a species, because what you're doing instead is, that's uncomfortable, throw a word at it and make it go away. And both sides do that, and that's not good. Like, the right does it too. Socialism. There are hard evidences for why people believe in socialism.
Right.
There is support for why people believe in socialism. There is even like logical reasoning that leads you to that belief. You need to understand that and understand the flaws in your own system that led people there if you are ever going to dismantle that viewpoint if you're against it.
Right.
And no one's willing to do that.
Yeah, everyone just wants to throw a word at it.
Right.
Well, yeah, my other beef with this is everyone has like the most, whatever you want to call it, prideful view of history too. Like, everyone wants to point out all these flaws and everything and make them seem like they're like these just evil, awful people. But then it's like, okay, but if you were put in that shoe, you would make mistakes too. And it's kind of like, okay, are you saying you're perfect? Are you saying you have no character flaws?
Right.
You have absolutely zero amount of racism in you?
Or that you'd have none at that time.
Right.
I mean, you think about it, if you were born in
1760...
You're indoctrinated with racism.
Right. You are saying that you are, like, marching along the streets being, like, racism evil? No, you would not be.
No.
Because from the second you were born, everyone around you, including the schools, the churches, the government, your parents, your friends, your family, everyone would be saying, oh, black people are not humans. And
right.
You would be hearing that from the time you were born.
Right.
I mean, to me, like, that, it's even more remarkable that the Founding Fathers even had the belief system of, no, this isn't right. Now, I would argue they didn't do enough to end it, but they were the first people to break out of the viewpoint of, this isn't right.
I'm also going to argue that there would be no America if they did.
Right.
I don't personally think, like, I'm just going to tell you my thoughts on this. If somebody came out as the Founding Fathers, well, if somebody came out, they wouldn't be a Founding Father either, because they hated gay people. But right. If one of the Founding Fathers came out and said, like, hey, listen, we are not going to allow any slavery.
Yeah.
that country would have fallen apart within a couple decades because there would have been like pushback.
Right.
Because people were so horribly racist and so used to that system of control.
Right.
That I don't think America would have lasted. So it was kind of, I always thought of it as a pick your battles. Like, yes, I absolutely would have preferred no slavery. Because you know what? America would have way less problems now if they never had slaves.
Yeah.
And that's going to sound dickish. I don't mean that in the way of like, because there would only be white people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like, because there wouldn't be so much anger and animosity between races. You'd have it between, you know, Americans and Native Americans from what happened there. But you wouldn't have like all this anger between Black Americans and white Americans on both sides of like, there's almost there's an anger on both sides of like, well, your ancestors did this to mine. And then there's an anger on the other side of like, shut the fuck up. I don't care what my ancestors did. I didn't do it.
Right.
And then they both get angry at each other. And you wouldn't have that if there was no slavery in America. And you wouldn't have, you know, the mistreatment on the railways with like Asian Americans probably, because they probably would have been treated with more respect if America was that far ahead of the curve that they had eliminated racism by that point.
Right.
A lot of modern day problems would be gone. So like absolutely, like even from a practical standpoint, I would love if that had been done away with. But I don't think the country would be around because I think that there were too many people like that would have pushed back against the founding fathers, who, by the way, people forget, had a small military of freaking farmers and some boat support of the French. Right. And they only won a war because they embarrassed the hell out of the British.
Right.
Like, it was so embarrassing to the British that they basically said, you know what, we'll just kind of stick around with a skeleton crew and wait for you to fail if you want to be a little baby.
Right.
That's how they saw it. It was a toddler throwing a tantrum. That's how they saw the Revolutionary War. So when you have, you know, a country like that where the British are sitting around waiting for it to fail, and they knew that they were waiting for it to fail, and George Washington definitely knew that if the British wanted to, they could send their entire military force to America and obliterate it. They're not going to push something that's going to ruin the country before it's been founded. That makes no damn sense.
Right.
But people say, like, well, they should have done it. It's like, yeah, that would have been awesome, but there'd be no America at all.
Right, they were focusing on just stabilizing the country.
Yes.
And they all had the viewpoint of, this will get ended someday.
Yeah, and that's not good to put it off on a future generation either, and I get that, but like, I'm saying there would be no future generation of Americans if they hadn't done that. It would have just gone back to the British.
Right.
And the Spaniards. That's all it would be. So, I don't know. I think that there's such a two-dimensional misunderstanding of history of like, oh, I would have done this, like you said. Jordan B. Peterson made a good point about this, and I know, oh, everybody hates Jordan B. Peterson. How dare I, like, say one thing he said positive. But, you know, he said a point that I find really interesting, which is, if you were, after the Treaty of Versailles, if you were in Germany, your family was starving, but you could be conscripted into the military, you could join up, you knew that you were basically probably going on like a suicide mission war against the world, but your family would be able to eat again, you'd probably join.
Right.
Now, yes, you probably wouldn't be one of those complete bastards who volunteered for the camps, because there were a lot of people who straight up chose to work in the concentration camps because they were horrible.
Right.
There were people who actively wanted to be there. But you probably would be infantry, or you probably would be out, you know, somewhere fighting.
Right, you'd be on like the Wehrmacht.
Right,
or in the Luftwaffe.
so that your family could live, you know. And then there are historical like accounts of Germans crying when they found out what happened in those camps.
Yeah,
there were a lot of Germans who didn't know, and that doesn't excuse it either. You know, ignorance doesn't mean that like it. Oh well, then who cares?
Right.
But I'm just saying there was a lot of subterfuge in that culture, because a madman essentially stepped in and used a power vacuum to become a god, and used the desperation of people around him to serve his own racist ideologies.
Right.
You know, that's what he did. And of course, a lot of people went along with it because they needed to feed their family, or they needed to, you know, actually get back to living a life. That country was bankrupt. They had nothing.
Yeah, there's accounts of people bringing like a wheelbarrow full of money just to buy like bread.
Yeah, because
And then they get robbed, and people would steal the wheelbarrow.
yeah, because
it's worth more.
the country's economy was devastated by World War One.
Yeah.
Which was mostly fought not over morality, but over trade disagreements and piracy and other bullshit like that. And then alliances between different countries that had been formed arbitrarily and then needed to be honored.
Yeah.
You know, like World War One was an accident.
Yep.
It only happened because, like, I had a friendship with you, you had a friendship with Bob, Bob had a friendship with Patricia, Patricia had a friendship with Carl, and someone beat up Carl. So
Right.
we all had to help Carl.
Right.
That's how World War One really happened. It was like a bad accident. And so, you know, when you have this country that is just completely devastated by this thing they never did really bring upon themselves, of course this madman is going to be able to step in, and of course people are going to join and look the other way and ignore signs of things that are happening or not look too deeply into it. Because at the end of the day, Hitler was the guy who put food on the table.
Right.
So, of course, we're not going to look too deeply into whatever that guy's doing. Because otherwise we starve. You know, and people have this arrogant attitude of, I would have stood up to them. It's like, really, would you? Would you have? Like, I can buy you wouldn't have volunteered for the camps to torture Jews.
Right.
I can buy that. You're probably not that bad of a person. But you would have said, my family can starve, I'm just not joining.
Right.
Really? I don't really believe you. You know, I don't believe most people would do that are not a psychopath in and of themselves. Because you're saying that you would forcibly starve your family.
Right.
To prove a point.
Well, and also it's also important to point out that we have the hindsight of 2020 right now.
Right.
We know everything that Adolf Hitler did in World War II.
Yes.
If someone living in 1938 does not know everything that Adolf Hitler did, they just know everything up to 1938.
And they know how it benefited them or
Right.
how it affected them. Like,
Yes,
they know.
They're seeing it in real time of, oh, I got food on my table. I like Hitler.
And you know what the rumors were, by the way? People say, like, well, they should have known. Like, where were all those Jews being taken on trains? You know what the rumor was? They were being escorted out of the country.
Yes.
I'm not saying that is good. That is horrible. That would be like us escorting every Latin American or, like, Latino American out of America. That is still racist. Mm-hmm. But that is, you cannot tell me that is the same as they were being taken, tortured, starved, sexually abused, beaten, and destroyed in camps forever.
Right.
Those are not the same thing as, like, hey, why don't you leave? They're both bad,
Right.
but one is very clearly worse. So, like, when that was the general public explanation of relocation versus, like, complete obliteration,
Yeah.
and these people are starving, they're probably going to take the government's word for it. And this should all be more of a cautionary tale of, like, not just believing everything you're told.
Yeah.
It shouldn't just be like well, if I was there, I would have stopped 9/11. You know, it's like that same it's the same thing. It's like, dude, you are such that is such dangerous thinking, because
You're also an arrogant prick.
well, you know
Like,
what that
shut the heck
is?
up.
That is I am the standard of morality, and I would know how to react in any historical situation.
Yeah.
Really, would you?
You know how you would like to react, but how would you react if you were there in real time without knowing the outcome?
Yeah, exactly. And that, I guess maybe I'm getting preachy, I don't know. So I'm sorry if I am, I'm not trying to. But I guess I'm just getting at that arrogance of, like, history, because what we're talking about, hey, by the way, live nudes.
Oh, epic.
I don't want to find the sign that says dead nudes.
Wait, look, it says live e-nudes.
Oh, an e-nude is like an e-girl. Hey, do you think e-girls will meet up with me if my prognosis comes back positive?
I think so. They have to.
Jill, can we meet up with e-girls if I get sick?
No, forget about that.
Whoa,
why
okay.
didn't the Jews just say no?
That's a good point. Why
Wait,
didn't the
yeah.
Nazis just say no, too?
Yeah.
Why didn't the Jews just not die?
They could have just held on.
Yeah, they could have just lived.
That's a great point.
Huh.
It's not hard. I do it every day.
You know what's funny? That's about as accurate of a point as I wouldn't have joined them.
Yeah, I know.
Also, I would have stopped 9/11 personally.
I know
Right.
you would have.
You would have, like, grabbed the plane
Yeah.
before it hit the building and, like, just halted it. Uh-huh. Got it.
I would have strapped some C4 to myself and gone to the cockpit.
How'd you get that on the plane?
Oh, I just stole it from one of the people who were already stealing the plane.
Pre-9/11, there was a lot that was allowed on planes. Like C4.
What's the C4?
I got my claymores. Like, let me just whip out like the actual sword, the claymore.
I would carry a bastard sword personally. The other day, like, I don't remember what it was Jill said. Like, Jill, what was it you said? Like, well, I would have just done this. And I started laughing really hard.
I don't remember, but I do remember you made like that joke about me being on a plane at 9/11 and me saying, yeah, I mean, I'd just make the plane not crash.
Oh, yeah, I told my mom, I was like, Jill probably would have just been like, guys, can we sit down and talk about this? Why do you actually want this plane? like negotiated with them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, did you
call
know...
those aggressive negotiations.
Jill, wait, come back.
What?
I was going to tell you something. You came down, and I was going to tell you something. Did you know that during 9/11, actually, well, was it 9/11? It was during the attempted attack on the Pentagon, I believe.
Uh-huh.
There were guys who did storm the cockpit and fight back, and that's one of the reasons the plane went off course.
Well, you see, they saved the Pentagon. Why didn't they save 9/11?
That's a good point.
Well, there
Why
was
weren't they on
I
that
mean, the
plane?
Twin Towers. Sorry.
What if they... Was that on the same day? Were they both
Yeah.
on 9/11?
Yeah.
What if they were like...
Well, there was also multiple planes.
What if they were like, we have to intercept the other plane? Like they went after it.
I'm pretty sure there was 3 planes, and they were planning on
there
hitting.
was multiple
Jill's
planes.
just
Yeah.
like, they should have taken the plane and like hit the other plane. And,
Well,
then,
they should have.
and they like jumped out and hijacked the third plane by pressing Y.
I'm pretty sure they were planning on hitting the Pentagon, the Twin Towers, and also, I'm not sure, but I think the White House.
Wait. In the MCU, do you remember in Spider-Man: Homecoming when he like steered the Vulture plane?
Oh!
Do you think in the MCU that was him stopping 9/11?
Yes.
Like Vulture was actually trying to hit the Twin Towers, but Spider-Man stopped it.
the Twin
No.
Towers are still canon in the MC universe.
What you don't know about is there was a deleted scene in No Way Home, actually, where this happened again. And Oscorp in the MCU, I know they changed it to it didn't exist,
Yeah.
but originally in the script it was going to exist in the Twin Towers.
Okay.
And there was a scene of Norman Osborn on the plane, and right as it's about to hit, he's like, "Out, am I?" And then you see his glider fly out of the plane, and then it cut to real footage of the actual historical disaster.
You're gonna get in trouble.
They were like, "Well, we can't put this in the movie."
Or what if Aunt May's apartment was in the Twin Towers and you just hear on the loudspeaker, "Can Spider-Man come out to play?"
Oh my.
And it looks out the window, just the plane coming in.
And then it cuts to historical footage, and then it cuts to Happy Hogan outside.
Happy Hogan going, woo!
Why is he doing the Tobey Maguire woo?
Well,
And
because
then Happy Hogan's like, "Woo!"
Happy Hogan is part,
Okay, no, just stop. I don't want to know what you're gonna say. Why don't you go back to sewing?
okay.
Nate and I are basically done with this. Nate, are you wanting to be done?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
We should probably end it at our 9/11 jokes. Before we get too far.
If anyone gets mad at me, I might not. Oh, look, I'm just saying. I wasn't able to schedule my diagnosis thing until like almost April. So like this might. You might be hearing the ravings of a dying man. Okay, you don't know. I'm doing my best to cope.
So people can't get mad at you, is what you're saying.
No one, Hitler, right after he died, realizing no one can get mad at him for World War II. Well, I'm dead now.
Well, like, as you're dying, you could pull, like, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg card. It's my dying wish to say the N-word. No, I was saying, like, the dying wish. Your dying wish. Your dying wish is to be racist.
I like the idea that her dying wish was to say the N-word.
I've always wanted to say it, guys. Liberals are just like, it's her dying wish.
Literals?
I said liberals.
I thought you said literal.
They're like, it's their dying wish. We gotta allow it.
Record it. Somebody record this monumentous occasion.
We have to allow this. Put it in the National Archive.
Oh my gosh.
I think we should be done.
I want there to be like some kind of alien like race that finds this Let's Play part.